Good evening once again from Copenhagen. Welcome to yet another hate-free talk from Denmark. Tonight we have a wonderful guest for you, Ellie Jokar, stand-up comedian, actress, rapper, and an activist. She's Danish with Iranian roots, and tonight we will talk about how she feels in Denmark. We will discuss migration and integration, and we will, of course, ask her about her project, The Pink Taxi. In her taxi, she takes not only ordinary people for a ride, but also people with extreme ideas. For example, far-right extremists or Muslims, simply to have a chat and to find out why they think the way they think. Don't forget that you viewers can also ask Ellie your own questions. Please write them into the comment section under this stream. Great having you with us, Ellie. How do you do today?
I am very good, thank you. The sun is out in Copenhagen, so the weather's been nice, so I can't complain.
So let's start with the questions right away.
Yes.
I understand that your parents had to leave Iran. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes. Back in '79, when a year before I was born, the Islamic we used to have a king in Iran, and he fled Iran because of some Hezbollahs, and they came in and they took the power. The regime in Iran changed from being an open-minded, modern country in the Middle East to becoming only Muslim country. And in '82, when I was about 2, my parents and we fled from Iran to Denmark. And it sounds like very easy, but it was actually, we walked 3 days through the mountains of Turkey to Iran at night, and got to Istanbul, stayed there for 8 months, and then we came to Denmark. The plan was for us, my parents' plan was basically going to the US because of a lot of Iranians back then moved to Los Angeles and California. But right before the decision was made, my dad's friend came and he said, you should look at a place called Denmark. It's a small country and it's very comfy, and they're open for refugees. So my parents thought, okay, let's go and see what happens. So we came to Denmark in the beginning of 80, or was it 83?
A lot of people, or some people, let's say, doubt that some refugees have a really valid reason to leave the country. What about your parents? Was the danger very real, or was it more like a precaution?
Yes, my dad's reason was he was a political activist back then. So what happened was a lot of the regime did not appreciate my dad's political views. And because my parents didn't want us to be brought up in a country where we were forced to be in a certain way, wear hijab, and being forced to not have freedom of expression, freedom of, religion. So my parents were in danger. Basically, my dad was in big danger, so we had to move because otherwise I would have lost my dad.
Did your parents tell you any stories about the journey? Was it did they encounter similar difficulties that we hear today with the smugglers, with the conditions? Was it the same back then?
Yes, I would say the smugglers have not become any nicer. They're pretty much the same. They usually do it for the money and for not actually for helping people. So, but since my dad was a political activist, I think that helped a lot. So he had some insight in this process of how to get out of Iran and flooding Iran through Turkey. But I think it's basically the same. I don't think a lot of those things have changed. And of course, my parents have talked to me about how awful it was. It was cold walking 3 nights with a kid. I was only 2 years old when we were flooding, and my brother was 7, and he walked the whole way, and we couldn't talk, we couldn't say nothing. And my parents had a really good life in Iran, so they didn't choose to leave Iran because they were like, oh, let's go to Denmark or let's fled the country. It was because they had no choice. There was no opportunity for my dad to stay there. And the consequence would also have been that my brother, a couple of years later, would have been used as a soldier because he was 7. So a couple of years later, the whole war started, Iraq war, blah, blah, blah. So there was a lot of obstacles. So therefore, it was very important for my parents that me and my brother were safe. My dad was a businessman. He had a really good job. He had shops in Iran. So we came from wealth to nothing when we fled the country. So it wasn't a choice. It was because we were forced to move and become refugees.
Did your parents also tell you what happened when they came to Denmark? Was the process of becoming getting a new life here easy, or was it difficult?
I would say, of course, they've told me a lot about what happened when we got here. When we got to Denmark opened their arms and were really happy that we came. They welcomed us, and I remember my mom telling me when we got to our first house, all the Danes would come with all their stuff, like vacuum cleaners, plates, and all the utilities that we would have used. We needed clothes, and they were really open-minded, and they were happy that they could help us. And we spent our first Christmas in Denmark with a Danish family, an older couple, that showed us all the traditions, like Christmas food. And we've never celebrated Christmas. So we saw our first Christmas tree. We danced around the Christmas tree because that's a Danish tradition. And Danes were really welcoming, especially towards me and my brother. They were really, really nice and warm when we got here.
So was growing up in Denmark same? Was it very cozy, comfortable for you?
It's funny that you ask, because I actually didn't know I was different until I became, I think, around 10, 11. I really didn't know that I looked a lot different than the other kids, and I knew I came from somewhere else, but I never thought about it. And then in school, we started learning about apartheid and Nelson Mandela and the racism and the blacks and the whites and all the stuff that actually happened around the world. And at that point, I understood, oh, I actually came from somewhere which does not represent blonde hair and blue eyes. In my class, I was the only brown girl with brown eyes and dark hair and looked different and had different food than the others. But I never thought of it as an obstacle in life. I just thought that this was just the way it was. I was a kid, so I think a lot of children, they try to adapt to where they are and try to get the best out of it until they meet the obstacle. I think when I became older in my teens, I started understanding the difference between me and my friends, and I started learning there's some difference between us. So
yeah. So there was no bullying, there was no making fun of you, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Did it?
Yeah. I was bullied. I remember I didn't know why they were bullying me. Like, and that's the thing. I was a kid and I didn't really understand, but I remember the first day in school that all the girls in my class, they stole it was raining, so I was wearing like rain boots. So they took my rain boots and they were running around school, outside school, and I was running around with like socks outside in the rain, trying to get my rain boots. And they were bullying me or they were teasing me, and they were like, oh, and they took my boots and threw it in the toilet and put the other one in the garbage can. And I was bullied because I had a darker mustache than the others, and I make a lot of joke out of that. I was dark skinned and I had big hair, but I didn't really think, like, I didn't feel like it was because I was new. I was looking different than all the other kids. And one of the major things that we have to remember is when we got to Denmark in the early 80s, there was not a lot of refugees in Denmark. There was not a lot of dark-skinned people. So therefore, everybody thought it was exotic, but at the same time, it was kind of like, she looks different, so we can tease her. I don't like using the word bully because they became some of my best friends, like further on in life, because we were kids. Some kids get teased because they are ginger, or wear glasses. I was just dark and looked different than the other kids, so therefore it was an easy target. But
Since we're talking about this, would you say that Danes are very much fitting the stereotype, but that they really are a lot about blue eyes and blonde hair? Is that a big deal around Denmark?
What do you mean a big deal?
Like we tend to imagine that the Nordic countries are about being blonde and with blue eyes, and that makes life maybe a little bit more difficult for anybody who is not blonde with blue eyes. So I'm asking if you feel like Danes are giving you a hard time. Is it a big deal here still to fit in the stereotype of Dane, which is somebody blonde?
I think like if they think about Danes, they usually have a perception of Vikings and, like big men with, like, and the horn and, like big muscular men, and the women with the, and they all called Inga and speak a little funny. I think the perception is definitely yes, of course, because that's their natives. The native Danes are blonde and light eyes. Not a lot of them look like me. So we have to remember when we're debating about this is we're still very new in the community. Some of the people that have been living here that are 80, 70 years old, they never really met a brown person. So therefore, the fear that they live with is what they read or see in the media. And I think, of course, when I was younger, I tried to dye my hair blonde and had blue contact lenses. And subconsciously, I was trying to fit in and look like my friends, which were native Danes. But the older I got, I found out my roots and where I came from. I should be proud of it because that's the mixture of me. Being a brown Dane is not a bad thing, because if I lived in Iran and I was a comedian and a rapper and an actress, I would look like everybody else. At least in Denmark, I look a little different. So in my field of work, I try to use the negative as a positive thing. For some people, it's like, oh, you should have been blonde. Yes, but I'm not. But I use it for my stand-up as a comedian. Now I can make fun of being Dane, but also being a Persian, like an Iranian.
Is that what your stand-ups are about? You're making fun of the stereotypes and things like that?
I would say a lot of it, yes. Mostly my last two one women show has been a lot about becoming or being a gray zone kid, being this person that has a foot in the Persian community, the Muslim community, and then at the same time, the Danish community. I'm very fortunate in many ways because I was brought up with Danes, but also later on, I learned about my roots and I practiced Islam for 10 years because I thought it was very interesting. I read the Torah, I read the Bible, and then the third book I read was the Quran because I wanted to be prepared for questions when people tell me, oh, in Islam, we don't do that. I want people to tell me whereabouts in the Quran does it state that point? So one of the most important things is seeking knowledge in life. And yeah, I think that's like one of the most important things.
Let me ask one more thing about the stand-ups. Would you say that, first of all, does it work? Do people understand when you make fun of the funny things that we do, as you know, whether they are Danish or Muslims? So does it work? And then would you say that humor is a good way of fighting prejudice and possibly racism?
Your first question, if comedy is a good tool, that's what you mean?
I mean, if it works, if people laugh at the jokes that are targeting themselves, you know, their own stereotypes and behavior.
I think a lot of people identify themselves in the different situations that I do, that I use to, when I do a sketch or when I do a joke. Like I said before, I joke a lot about what I look like as a young girl. I used to have a mustache because I was darker than the other girls. And the Danish girls do have blonde hair, but you can't see it. So I make fun of that because that's something that a lot of people are not aware of. I make fun of my mom, how she brought me up, where she was like, oh, you can't do this. You're a good Muslim girl. And the Muslims laugh about it because they see and they identify themselves in it. And the Danes laugh about it, hopefully, because they can learn, but at the same time, they actually understand the satire. I did a satire show 8 years ago with 3 other Muslim girls, which went worldwide because this was the first time in Danish history 4 Muslim girls did a satire show where we were making fun of Muslims, but also the Danes, all the prejudice that was in the community, in the country. So we would wear burqas. I had a pink burqa walking around the main street, and she's all pink from top to toe. And I have a little chihuahua wearing the same outfit. And this was our perception of what would Paris Hilton look like in Saudi Arabia. And that makes people laugh. And when I walked down the street and was doing this social experiment, people thought this was the most hilarious thing. But at the same time, they were taking pictures of me. They were like, please, can we take a picture of you? And I just found out the color of the burqa really meant had a lot to say because it was pink. People thought it was exotic. People found out, oh, she's not dangerous. 2 days later, we did the same experiment with a black burqa, and people did not stop and take pictures of me. People were scared of me and thought I was, a suicide bomber or something. So I would say Danes really use humor a lot, especially when it comes to difficult topics. Then it's really nice to use humor. And I use humor a lot, even when we talk about hard subjects like this, hate crime, racism, and you need to be able sometimes to laugh about stuff and laugh about the differences that we have instead of putting your barriers up, because then we don't listen. Then we just yell at each other. Humor and satire connects people like music. Music does not have a language. Music is a sound that we listen to. So,
are there still people that don't get it, even though you use humor and maybe majority of the people like it and they're able to laugh about it, but some people, either from Danish side or from migrant side, let's say Muslims, they feel it's offensive because somehow,
definitely, I would say definitely. I did a video in the pink taxi with a guy called Rasmus Paludan, which is an extremist in Denmark. He doesn't really believe in refugees, and he wants all the refugees out of the country. I invited him into my taxi, and we had a very pleasant talk. I actually drove around in the pink taxi for 2.5 hours.
Oh, really?
That 2.5 hours was put to like 15 minutes of, show. And a lot of Danes did not understand the way I used humor. They thought I was dead serious. And still till this day, I have people writing me, oh, you're like one of those immigrants. You should just get out of the country. We don't like you. You're dark skinned, blah, blah, blah. And on the other side, you got the minorities in Denmark. Sometimes I do some jokes where they get offended. But that's how it is being a comedian, and especially a comedian that tries to use her voice to connect people. If I only do comedy to please people, then I'm not true to me. So therefore, sometimes I have to search for I try as much as I can to provoke both sides.
Okay.
It's not, I don't have a plan only, provoking the Danes or the Muslims. I just do it because it feels right. And because I feel like I need to talk about this topic because it's important. I have a tendency of making fun of some of the politicians in Denmark. And especially one of them, she's not married. So I always have a tendency of, joking about her, of why she's not married. And that's because in our culture, when you don't get married, it's like there's a lot of, fun jokes in that too.
Are you married too?
No. And that's the fun thing. I am so not a part of the whole, I'm 41, I'm not married, I don't have kids. So that's a problem. I say a problem, but it's not really. But in the Muslim community, I should have been married and have kids and etc. But I'm not. So I can make fun of it. And I can make fun of all the women that are not married like me.
So you don't fit the stereotype there. I just wanted, because you mentioned briefly Rasmus Paludan. I think very few people actually know him outside of Denmark. But can you tell people what kind of person that is? What kind of politician is he?
For our last political round that we had, Rasmus Paludan came out with a party called Stram Kurs, which believes, like, he is a guy that went around Denmark in ghetto areas where a lot of immigrants are, and he would burn the Quran. And that was his demonstration. He was like, I do have freedom of speech, and I can burn the Quran if I feel like it, and therefore I will burn the Quran. A lot of people were upset about this. A lot of people were demonstrating against Rasmus Paludan because he was doing all these things to get attention. He started off being a YouTube guy that was just doing some YouTube videos. And after a while, he got enough votes to actually be a part of the whole political vote. And the Danish politicians didn't really approve of him. And they were really, because he's very hateful. He's very hateful. And his statement is all the 700,000 immigrants in Denmark should be sent out of the country. He doesn't care where we're going to be put, but just get out of the country. And he does not like Muslims at all. Sorry. He doesn't like Muslims, and he's a very different type of extremist. He's a Danish extremist. And then you got the Muslim extremists. So he's like the Danish ISIS.
Okay, that's a good introduction to Rasmus Paludan. I would just add one information that I hear a lot from Danes, that quite a lot of Danes are upset that he actually that the Danish state had to spend a lot of money on security for Mr. Paludan, because apparently, he needs a lot of police to guard him when he is burning the Quran. Since you already mentioned also the pink taxi again, let's talk about it a little bit. So what kind of idea is it? How did you get it? When did it start?
I started the pink taxi about 3.5 years ago. I was on my way home from Miami, Florida. On the plane, I watched there was like this travel show in Dubai where they had pink taxis, which are driven by women, and these taxis are only for women and kids and women with their families. And on the same trip back home to Denmark, I saw comedians in cars having coffee with Jerry Seinfeld. And I love Jerry Seinfeld because he's super intelligent. So my idea at the beginning was, why don't we have pink taxis in Denmark? Because what if we had pink taxis driven by women, and more women would actually be able to work, like women that like driving a car? And if we try to rebrand the whole taxi business, that was the original idea. And then I was like, what if I just invite different people into my taxi and just have a conversation with them? Because we've seen talk shows where people come in and they talk to celebrities and etc. But I felt I could give a space, a room to talk to people, ordinary people, celebrities, extremists, just like people. Like if you're a cab driver, you can never decide what kind of person gets into your taxi. So I was like, that's what I really want to do. So the idea was basically meeting people and talking to people. And I love being getting my mind stimulated by other people's point of views. And I want to learn, why do you have that point of view? Why do you feel like this? How did you become a rapper? How did you become an extremist? Why are you wearing a burqa? Why, like all the questions that comes to my mind. And the first person I had in my taxi is one of the oldest and one of the, I think he's the only politician in Denmark which has been in politics for so many years, and his name is Bertel Holter. And we did a radio show, and I had my pink taxi downstairs, and I asked him, I was like, would you mind driving around with me for like an hour? I didn't have a plan or anything. I just asked him to get into the taxi, and he was like, sure, I have an hour and a half until my next appointment. Let's go for a drive. And he's like 70 some years. So we got into the taxi and we just started talking about everything that came to my mind. And one of the things that people really like amazed about was that I asked him, have you ever smoked weed, like cannabis? Marijuana? And he said yes. And people were like shocked about the fact that he smoked marijuana. And he was like, yes, I tried it when I was young in the US, but never in Denmark. And that got into the papers. And people were like, wow, he smoked weed. And journalists were calling me, how did you get him to say yes? And I said, I just asked him the question and he answered. There was no like trick question. And then I just found out that sometimes if you just ask people to get into your car and go for a drive, and I obviously have an ability of talking to people, and I make my guests feel comfortable, because the show is not about me. The show is always about the passenger in the car, and people really like that. When I invite a politician, I don't invite the politician. I invite the man or the woman behind the politician, because I want to know, what did you have for breakfast? What did you do? Like, and that makes people relax, because I don't have an agenda. I don't want to make fun of them. I don't want to mock them. I just want to talk to them, and that makes people comfortable.
Just a quick question. The pink burqa, the pink taxi, now you're wearing a pink sweater. Is pink your favorite color?
And my favorite color is not pink, by the way. I never liked the color pink. I don't know why. I was cold and I thought they're probably going to think I'm trying to do like a pink thing going on.
It's probably a pink conspiracy.
Yes.
I think I would like to know, what do you discuss with so-called ordinary people? Because these people, as you say, usually don't have access to media. They hardly ever have any kind of voice. So what do you talk about? Why do you think they have something interesting to say?
Because I believe that every person has a story. We all have a story, and we all have something that we can learn from each other by just listening, and by driving around for an hour with a guest and then editing it to like 15 minutes. You take all the highlights of that conversation. Sometimes a lot of the good stuff we have to like kill our darlings, but at the end of the day, I believe everyone has a story, and you don't need to be a celebrity to be interesting. Ordinary people, like the woman, which is 80 years old, she has a story to tell me. She can tell me or learn me something that I never thought. And I believe everyone has something interesting, and somehow in that conversation, we will enlighten that. We will try to talk about that the best possible way.
And when it comes to the people with extreme ideas, I have a lot of questions. I think first of all, how do you feel about being in a small space with somebody who, for example, hates you or claims to hate you, wants to kick you out of the country, hates your kind, is racist? How does it feel?
It's never fun to sit in a car where people don't like you, but I am in control because it's my car. And I invited you into my car, so I demand some respect. And I would say people that I don't agree with or I don't like, I still invite them because I still want to know how did you get to that point in life where you hate people because of our skin color or the color of my eyes? Like, how did that come about? I so want to understand the way of thinking because I'm curious. And I think because I am so curious, I have a tendency of actually ignoring the fact that they don't like me. Or if they feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to be a part of this country, but you still got into my taxi to talk to me. So you do want to talk to me because you at some point want to learn something about me and where I stand. And I think that's the key of doing the show that I am doing at the moment. And I feel very blessed, I have to say, that these people actually do want to be a part of my show. I don't really feel bad about having these people in my car. I always go like, that's their opinion, like, thank God I live in a country where I do have freedom of speech and I can express myself the way I want to, and they can express themselves the way they want to. And we do live, and I was brought up in a democratic country, which means that I have to be able to endure the fact that people have different points of view than me. So that's just a strength, I would say, that you can sit in a car with someone else and have a conversation.
Since you mentioned it, Denmark is one of the countries with, let's say, extreme view on the freedom of speech. How do you feel about that? Is it a good thing or is it a controversial thing to be able to express anything you want, even though it's an outrageous lie, for example? Deny Holocaust, for example.
Oh, that would be very denying the Holocaust. I would say it would be a very bad thing because everybody knows it's what happened in the history of. So I personally really like freedom of speech because freedom of speech gives me the opportunity to speak my mind and speak whatever I feel like. If I lived in Iran, I wouldn't have that opportunity the same way. So freedom of speech is something that I care a lot about, and I think we protect a lot in Denmark. But I would say during the last couple of years, it kind of changed because now it's like, oh, you can say it, but he can't say it. So there is a difference between who is saying it. So is that freedom of speech or is it not? Or is it just hatred? Like what Rasmus Paludan did. If you did that once or twice, okay, you made your point. But why do you have to continue doing hate speeches about people? That I don't condone at all. And I think then we use freedom of speech in a wrong way. We do have freedom of speech, but we also have a responsibility of taking, responsibility of what we are doing and our actions.
So it's not only about shouting out whatever we think, I guess. You have to check your facts before you say anything.
Yeah, because I actually, I will send you a link. I did an episode of satire in English where I am investigating freedom of speech in Denmark. And I actually stand on the main street of Copenhagen and I yell at people, oh my God, you are so ugly and fat, and and people are like, whoa, you can't say that. And I'm like, but it's freedom of speech, isn't it?
Okay.
And they're like, no, you have to use it in a, in a different way. So, yeah.
Okay. So the responsibility should be kind of a boundary to what we say out loud. If I get it. You are inviting ordinary people. We talked about far-right extremists. Are you trying to invite all of the kinds of extremists into your taxi? Leftists, for example, left-wing extremists.
Yes.
Can you maybe tell us what kind of ideas do left-wing extremists have in Denmark?
The left wing, you mean
somebody's a communist, maybe. Somebody has very, very extreme communist ideas. I don't know, because we have a different history in Czech. So I'm curious if Denmark has similar version of left-wing extremists.
We do have the left wings here are very like kumbaya, I would say, like like just like the people that I invite to the pink taxi are just people that do have different point of views. And the left wings, if I take the right wing, I should also bring the left wing, because you can't just tell one side of the story. There's always three sides of the story. There's him, hers, and the truth. So you always need all the different, layers of the truth. So I wouldn't be a very good host in my pink taxi if I only take the people that benefits me or for clickbait. I bring all the different types in, and the left wing, we have some left wing people here that feels like everybody should be allowed to get into the country. We should help as many people as possible. And I also question them when they say that. And I'm like, but why don't you feel like we have to integrate the people here better before we let other peoples in? Because that's what a Dane or a right-wing person would be thinking if I don't ask the critical questions. And they usually wouldn't expect me to ask them those questions. Do you understand? So for them, it would be like, oh, yes, I am so for it. And yeah, let's go left wing. But yeah.
Then they maybe don't have really detailed idea about how to do stuff they want, right? Is that happening sometimes? That they have a... No. If you ask them, for example, okay, you want to take everybody in Denmark, you want to help everybody, and you ask them, okay, in practice, in reality, how should we do that? And then they maybe maybe they struggle with, what they actually want, how to do it.
Exactly. And I think that is important, because that's how you get the different perspectives on politics. And I think that's super important.
I was also trying to express myself to get to the point that I think that you are trying to provoke people into thinking their ideas more through, because it's easy to shout something.
Yeah.
If it's far right, if it's leftist, if it's any kind of extreme, but then when you start thinking about it, it might be very difficult to do in reality. I think quite a lot of people would be interested in Czech, where we don't have a large Muslim community in the Muslim extremists that you met in your project. What do you think about these people?
Oh, I think all kinds of extremists are bad, personally. But I always find it super interesting. How did you get to that point? Like, why do you feel like wearing a burqa? Because for other people, that's an extreme thing to do to express how you choose to live your life. And I don't applaud people being extremists, but that's their life. That's the way they choose to live. And who am I to decide what's right or wrong? So I feel like I give them the space, the pink taxi to express their feelings and express their way of thinking, to start a debate about, okay, is it a positive way of living? Or maybe sometimes people can actually learn. For example, I had a girl that are wearing a niqab, which means you can't see nothing. You can only see a little bit of her eyes. And I learned from that taxi drive that her family, and she's from the Middle East, I learned that her family didn't want anything to do with her when she put on the burqa. So she has no contact with her family because her family do not believe in the niqab. She chose to wear that because that's how she felt that she was getting closer to what she believes in. And my way of thinking, I was like, what? I thought your family were like, oh, great. Now you're wearing a niqab and they were happy. And she was like, no, I don't have any contact with my family today because I chose to wear this niqab. So sometimes some of the thoughts, prejudice that I have are also being, met through a conversation. Because then I found out, okay, it's not something her family forced her to do. It's not something that's a part of her culture. She just felt like doing it. So, yeah.
Since we're talking about the burqas, if I remember correctly, it's prohibited to wear burqa in public in Denmark.
Yes.
What is your personal opinion about that? Is it a valid thing to ask to people? Please don't wear burqas when you're in public, or is it a violation of rights of Muslims?
I think exactly that law, if that was more aimed for the country, like a more broadened thing, it would have been okay. But since it was like politics directed towards the Muslims, I believe that was a wrong way of I just thought it was not the right way of finding a solution, because at that point, the people that were wearing a burqa registered in Denmark, 70% of the women wearing a burqa, which was seven girls in Denmark registered as burqa users, were Danes. Danish, yes.
Okay.
So it was girls that converted to Islam and chose to wear a burqa. Not a lot of Arabs, Persians, Turkish, Pakistan. They don't really wear burqas because it's not seen very well upon.
Okay.
So when this rule came about, we were discussing 7 people in Denmark, and we were using a lot of space in the media, a lot of time discussing, should we wear burqas? Shouldn't we? They made it into like everybody was wearing a burqa, but there was only 7 people wearing this burqa. So it was targeted to 7 people, which were also ethnical Danes. So the problem was kind of like not true, because they weren't really telling the truth, and they weren't making it into like all Muslim women were wearing a niqab or a burqa in Denmark.
Okay.
And not a lot do. And I think the women that began wearing the burqa afterwards were basically trying to provoke. They wanted to provoke, the government, and they felt like, why do you want to choose what I can wear and what I can't wear? So can Christians not wear the cross? Can the Jews not wear their hat? I don't remember the name in English, but so how far can the politicians go of choosing what we can wear and what we can't wear? I think that is the major problem, is when the politicians were trying to decide that.
So if I understand correctly, it became more a political issue than something targeting uprooting extremism.
Yeah.
And it's
Exactly.
probably not gonna solve extremism in the Muslim community if you ban the burqas. Okay. I think I would like to ask you, what's the current situation right now in Denmark? You are a Muslim. You are of Iranian descent. You are publicly very active. How do you feel right now living in Denmark? What's the atmosphere like?
The atmosphere here is very tense at some point. And especially because there's a lot of racism, debate about racism, and I say a lot, but there's been some press in the media about girls wearing the hijab, where they were like, where a man came over and tore her hijab from her head and said, "Go back to your country. You don't belong here. You're not Danish." The situation is like, me personally, I don't feel the same racism. I feel it in a different way because of the way I work. But if you wear a hijab in Denmark, I think it's a little more difficult in some sense. It's more difficult getting a job, maybe. It takes many more interviews before you actually get a job. The boys are usually stereotyped as being gangsters, drug dealers, bad guys. If you see a guy come in a big car, what the first thought is, oh, he's a drug dealer. But then you talk to him, he's a doctor. And then you're like, wow, my bad. So I would say the situation right now in Denmark is a little tense. And especially because of the whole subject about talking about racism. Because Denmark does not want to portray themselves as a racist country. And I understand that, because Denmark has always been good to refugees. And we have a lot of activists in Denmark that try to show the different side of Danish people.
But the situation probably got worse after, I think you mentioned in your interviews, 9/11, and then rapidly after the so-called refugee crisis. That's when things got more intense, right?
Yeah.
Also in Denmark.
Especially after 9/11, that was one of the big things. I don't think it's only a Danish thing. I think the whole world just switched their mindset after 9/11 and felt like, wow, all Muslims from the Middle East are terrorists or has an agenda of ruining my country, which I don't believe is right. Then we had the whole ISIS in Syria. That didn't really help the situation either. So it was like, it just became bigger and bigger and worse And how do you how do you convince the media that's not the truth when that's the only thing they want to talk about? They only want to talk about ISIS and identify Muslims as ISIS and extremists, and that's not the truth. And that's why I do what I do in my work, to show the different I can't say that word, the different types of people that we represent. Yeah. I can't say that.
Right. Yeah. Is that also the reason why you're not only an entertainer but also an activist? Do you feel like you want to be active in society and help some causes?
Of course, it's very important when you have a voice in a community, in a country, that you use it the best possible way. And you try to raise your voice when you hear something and you feel like this is not right. And but what I do, I use a lot of humor. I use satire. I use the pink taxi. I try the most possible way of try to show them show them through humor, how we can laugh at our own stupidity sometimes.
Okay. Well, just by the way, what kind of topics are you involved in? Is that that's the migration topic, of course, but what are the others that you work on?
I work on LGBTQA plus blah 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 blah. That's one of the things that I've done some. I've done some for hate crime. I try to involve in the debates and discussions that I feel like I can use my voice. I don't just get into any conversation. Like the burqa, I'm not a burqa user, but I can speak my voice and say, hey, there's something going on here because the facts are not right. But I'd rather have somebody wearing a burqa, invite her into the taxi and get her perception and her way of thinking out. So sometimes I don't use my own voice, but I use my platform to show all the differences that we also have in our country, in Denmark.
We have a little bit more than 2 minutes left, so I think we should start wrapping this interview up. And I think I would like to hear from you, what kind of message would you send to people in Czech or in Europe or all over the world who are afraid of migrants, of Muslims, or what can they do with such a fear, or what should they do?
I think one of the most important things in a situation of fear is talking. I feel one of the best ways of putting the fear aside is going out and actually getting involved in communities and learning about our differences, because when we learn about the other people, now I say other people, but people that do not look like us, we usually have a tendency of finding out how much we do have in common. We just eat differently or talk differently, but a lot of the ways that we are thinking might actually be the same. And remember to ask questions. Don't be scared of asking questions and being like, why do you wear a hijab? Why did you come to this country? Not with hate, but with love. And the more we meet people with love and humor, the more we can connect. And that's like one of the major things. And all that I do it with love. And that's why I believe that I can do what I do. If I did it with hate, you could feel it. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for a wonderful interview. Thank you for all the ideas that you shared. Thank you, everyone that was watching. We wish you a pleasant night from Copenhagen, and we'll see you next time. Tune in on our HateFree Talks. Have a good night. Bye. Bye.